Maggie Harper sat in the quiet of her London office, her fingers lightly tapping against her laptop as she reviewed the keynote slides for the European Property Management Conference. The hum of the hotel business center was a familiar background, but it couldn't mask the anticipation she felt for the call that was about to come. Her son, Ethan, had mentioned a few days ago that his wife, Sophia, was due any day now. A granddaughter. Maggie couldn't help but feel that excitement deep in her bones. Then her phone rang, the name Ethan flashing on the screen. Her heart leapt into her throat. "Mom, it's happening," Ethan's voice came through, breathless, excited. "Sophia's in labor. We're at the hospital. A few more hours and you're going to have a granddaughter, Mom." Her breath caught. A granddaughter. The reality of it hit her all at once, bringing a wave of emotion so intense it made her stomach flip. She hadn't been able to visit as often as she'd wanted, living halfway across the world in London while Ethan and Sophia settled into their life in Connecticut. Now, here it was, the moment she'd been waiting for. Her daughter-in-law was giving birth to a little girl, her granddaughter. "I'm getting on a plane," Maggie blurted, before her mind had fully processed the thought. "I'll be there as soon as I can." But then the reality of her commitment hit her like a ton of bricks. The conference, she'd been preparing for it for months. The 200-strong audience, the contract with the event organizers, the pressure to deliver. She glanced at the screen again, seeing the list of attendees and the polished slides she'd meticulously crafted. Her heart tugged. "You have that conference thing, right?" Ethan's voice brought her back to the moment. "I know it's a big deal, but she'll still be here. I'll send you all the photos, Mom." Maggie closed her laptop slowly, letting the weight of the decision settle over her. She had a responsibility to the people who had hired her, to her career. But more than that, she had a promise to keep, one to be there for her family. Ethan, his wife, and now, a baby girl. The promise of being the kind of grandmother who showed up, not from a distance but with her whole heart. "I'll be there in 4 days," Maggie said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Tell Sophia I'm coming. I'm bringing gifts and everything." She could hear the smile in Ethan's voice. "She'll be glad. Love you, Mom." The call ended, and Maggie sat in the sterile hotel room, looking at the empty chair beside her. She thought about the distance between her and her son, the missed calls, the family gatherings that hadn't happened because of time zones, schedules, and busy lives. Ethan had grown up so fast, and here she was, a world away, barely part of the life she had helped shape. The thought stung. But not today. Today was for her granddaughter. Maggie took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked to the closet. She was going to pack quickly, catch the next flight, and leave behind the comfortable chaos of work for the messier, sweeter chaos of family. This was her chance to be there, to be present. She felt the excitement build again, this time overshadowing her doubts. She grabbed her coat, her suitcase, and her determination to make it work. Her granddaughter was waiting. Maggie's rental car hummed along the winding streets of Greenwich, Connecticut, a small part of her still processing the weight of what she was about to experience. The house was everything she had imagined. Classic, timeless, a white colonial with black shutters nestled behind mature maples and perfectly manicured hedges. It was the kind of place that whispered old money and family tradition, the sort of home you'd find in the pages of a glossy magazine or on the cover of a suburban real estate brochure. The driveway was a winding loop, with just enough space for a few luxury cars. Maggie could see Ethan's SUV parked near the entrance as she pulled up. She felt the familiar tug of anticipation in her chest, but something in the air felt off. The house was silent, a stillness hanging over it that seemed almost too perfect. Maggie grabbed the bags she had packed with love, silk baby blankets, a stuffed lamb, and a silver rattle that had caught her eye at a boutique in Westport. Too much, maybe, but who could resist? This was her first grandchild, and she intended to spoil her, even if only with the gift of her presence. As she approached the front door, Maggie's hand hovered over the brass knocker. The house seemed too quiet, like the calm before a storm. She had expected the noise of a baby, the soft cooing or a distant cry, even a newborn's restless murmur. But nothing. It was as if the house was holding its breath. The door opened before she could knock, and there stood Ethan, his tired eyes and unshaven face making him look older than she remembered. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt, as if he hadn't bothered to change out of the clothes he'd slept in. His eyes met hers briefly before darting away, as if there were something he couldn't quite face. "Mom," he said, his voice strained, as though the words were a weight he couldn't shake off. He stepped aside to let her in, but the door didn't open wide enough. There were no happy shouts, no excited noises to greet her. No baby. "Where's the baby?" Maggie asked, her voice trembling slightly as she crossed the threshold. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, from her arrival to the joy of holding her granddaughter for the first time. But nothing could have prepared her for the thick tension in the air. Ethan stepped back, his eyes avoiding hers as he closed the door behind her. There was a tightness in his posture, as if something was weighing him down. Maggie could see the strain in his face, the way he seemed to shrink, as though being in her presence was difficult. "Come in," he muttered, gesturing vaguely toward the living room. But his voice had none of the warmth she had hoped for. There was a coldness to it, a reluctance. Maggie's mind raced as she followed him. There was no bassinet, no sign of a baby's presence, no soft toys or diapers littering the room, no little squeaks or whimpers from the nursery. It was as if they were living in a world where children didn't exist. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, trying to catch any hint of what had happened, but nothing stood out. Sophia appeared from the adjoining hallway, her face pale and drawn, as though she hadn't slept in days. She wore white linen pants and a silk blouse that hung loosely around her slender frame. Her usual elegance was gone, replaced with an almost eerie calmness. She looked at Maggie, offering a faint, awkward smile, but there was no joy in it. No excitement. She didn't even mention the baby. "Hello, Maggie," Sophia said flatly, her voice quiet, distant. "We need to talk." Maggie's heart raced as she followed them into the living room. The room was pristine, with antique furniture and framed family portraits on the walls. There was a large settee, an old-fashioned sofa, not the cozy kind you'd expect for a family with a newborn. The place felt more like a museum than a home. Maggie stopped in the center of the room, her confusion growing. "Where is she, Ethan?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I came here to meet my granddaughter." Ethan didn't respond right away. He sat down on the settee, his shoulders sagging as though he'd aged 10 years since Maggie last saw him. Sophia sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap, avoiding Maggie's gaze. There was something so profoundly wrong in the air that Maggie could feel her pulse quicken. "We gave her up for adoption, Maggie," Sophia said, her tone so flat it sent a shiver down Maggie's spine. It was as if the words were being said by someone else, a stranger, not the woman who had carried this child for 9 months. "WH what?" Maggie's voice caught in her throat, her mind struggling to process the words. "You gave her up, for adoption, my granddaughter, after everything. Why, where is she?" The house seemed to shrink around her as her world collapsed. Her son, the son she had raised with love and care, sat before her with his head lowered, his eyes on the floor. Sophia didn't look at her either. Neither of them had the strength to face her. Ethan finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "She's with an agency. They'll find her a family. It's already done." Maggie's chest tightened as she sank into a nearby chair, the words sinking in slowly, each one sharper than the last. She couldn't comprehend what they were saying. "You gave her away," she whispered, disbelief bleeding into her voice. "You gave up a 5-day-old baby because she's deaf." Sophia nodded, the faintest trace of guilt flashing in her eyes, but it quickly vanished, replaced by a hardness that made Maggie's heart break even more. "We're not equipped to handle a damaged child," Sophia said, the words slipping out as though they were nothing more than a simple fact. "The specialists, the therapy, the time, my family wouldn't accept her. We had to think of what was best for us." Maggie's hands trembled as they flattened against her thighs, her mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. She felt like she was suffocating, unable to breathe in the cold air between them. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, her voice cracking. "No, this can't be happening. I'm her grandmother. I'll take her. I'll raise her myself." Ethan looked up for the first time, his face hardening. "It's already done, Mom," he said quietly. "You can't change it. It's over." The words hung in the air, each one more painful than the last. Maggie stood, her frustration building. She wasn't leaving without her granddaughter. She couldn't. "I'll never accept this," she said, her voice firm, determined. "Tell me where she is and I'll go get her. You've made your choice, but I'm not leaving without her." The room seemed to close in around Maggie as she stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She stared at Ethan and Sophia, the two people she had once trusted above all others, now sitting side by side on the antique settee, their eyes lowered, their faces unreadable. The walls felt like they were pressing against her, suffocating her with the coldness that hung in the air. The silence between them was deafening, louder than any baby's cry could ever be. She felt the world shift beneath her feet as Sophia's flat, emotionless words echoed in her ears. "We gave her up for adoption." Maggie wanted to scream, to demand that they take it back, that it was some terrible mistake, but the words lodged themselves in her throat, choking her. Her granddaughter, 5 days old, gone for good. A flood of emotions rose within Maggie: shock, disbelief, anger, and an overwhelming sorrow that seemed to drown everything else. She had spent her entire life raising her children, being the best mother she could, only to have it thrown in her face now, when it mattered most. She had traveled all this way to meet her granddaughter, to welcome this new life into the world, but instead she was faced with a decision so cold, so final that she couldn't comprehend it. She felt her breath catch in her chest. The anger came first, sharp and swift like a slap to the face. How could they? How could Ethan and Sophia, her own flesh and blood, make such a callous decision? "Why?" Maggie's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with hurt. Her eyes darted between Sophia and Ethan, seeking some sign of remorse, some shred of human decency in their faces. "You gave her away because she's deaf." Sophia didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Her voice was ice cold, detached like she was discussing the weather. "She's not what we expected, Maggie. We can't raise a damaged child." The words cut through Maggie like a knife. "You don't understand. It's too much. We can't handle it." Maggie's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She fought to keep the tears at bay, but they threatened to spill over. How could she stand here and hear this? How could Sophia say such things about her granddaughter, about a child who hadn't even had a chance to prove herself? A child who was only 5 days old, already discarded as if she were worthless. "No," Maggie managed to say, her voice low and shaking. "You don't get to say that about her. She's not damaged. She's my granddaughter. I'll take her. I'll raise her. You made a mistake, and I'm not letting you get away with it." But Ethan didn't move, didn't speak. He sat there beside Sophia, his hands clasped together in his lap, his face drawn, his eyes glued to the floor. There was no fire in his eyes, no defense of his wife's words, no anger or frustration that she had made this decision without him. He was silent, almost as if he had already given up, as if he had accepted that Ava, his daughter, was gone forever. Maggie's frustration grew, bubbling up from deep inside her. She stepped forward, her gaze locked on Ethan. "Tell me where she is, please. I'll go get her myself." Her voice cracked as the plea escaped her. "I'll bring her home. I'll take care of her. I'll love her. Just tell me which agency. Tell me where to find her." But Ethan still wouldn't meet her eyes. He just shook his head, his lips tightening into a grim line. "You can't. It's already done. The adoption is closed, Maggie. The records are sealed. We have no obligation to tell you anything." His words were like a slap in the face. Maggie stepped back, stumbling slightly, feeling like the ground had just been ripped from beneath her. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You've sealed her fate. You've made sure I can never find her." Sophia's voice cut through the tension again, her tone unyielding. "It's not your decision to make, Maggie. We've done what's best for our family. You have no rights here." The words echoed in Maggie's ears, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. No rights. No rights to her own granddaughter. They had made sure that no one, especially her, could stand in the way of their decision. They had locked her out, leaving her powerless with nothing but the knowledge that her granddaughter was out there, somewhere, alone and rejected. "No," the word came out in a strangled sob. Maggie's fists clenched tighter. "I will never accept this," she said, her voice steadying, filled with a determination she hadn't known she was capable of. "I will find her, Ethan. I will find her and I will bring her home. You're wrong. You are so wrong." Ethan looked up for the first time, his expression hard and unreadable. "It's done, Mom. It's over. She's gone. Let it go." But Maggie couldn't. She wouldn't. The pain was too much, the injustice too deep. She wouldn't let her granddaughter be erased from her life because of their callousness. She wouldn't let Ava grow up thinking no one wanted her. "I'm not letting this go," Maggie said, her voice resolute, the fire of determination burning in her chest. "You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine." With that, she turned and walked out of the living room, her heart heavy with the promise of the fight ahead. She didn't know where to start. She didn't know how she was going to do it. But one thing was certain, she wasn't leaving Connecticut without Ava. The door clicked shut behind her, and as Maggie stepped out into the quiet, she felt a cold resolve settle over her. This was far from over. This was just the beginning. Maggie stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to process the words Sophia had just spoken. The room seemed to blur around her, the harshness of the truth crashing down like a wave. It wasn't just that Ethan and Sophia had given up Ava, it was the reason why. "She's deaf," Sophia had said, as if the words carried no weight. "She failed the hearing test at the hospital. We couldn't raise a child like that. We couldn't handle it." The words echoed in Maggie's mind, replaying over and over again as she tried to understand what was happening. Ava was deaf. Was that why her own flesh and blood, her granddaughter, was discarded like some unwanted object? Because of something as simple and as unchangeable as a hearing impairment? Maggie's breath hitched. The word defective burned in her chest like a hot iron. Sophia had said it without a second thought, like it was just another label to slap on something that didn't fit their perfect image of a family. "Damaged," she had said. The word left Maggie feeling sick, her stomach twisting into knots. She shook her head, as if doing so would make the truth go away. But it didn't. It was still there, pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't escape. Her mind flashed back to the moments when she'd first heard about Ava, the excitement, the hope. She had dreamed of holding her granddaughter, seeing her tiny face, hearing her first cry, and wrapping her in the warmth of family love. She had imagined the smiles, the joy, the laughter that would fill the house. But instead, she had come to a cold house, empty of the sounds of a baby, and filled with the bitterness of decisions made in fear and ignorance. "Ethan," Maggie said, her voice quiet but edged with disbelief. "How could you? How could you throw away your own daughter because she's deaf?" Ethan's eyes were red, his face pale. He didn't speak at first, his gaze downcast as though he was ashamed to even look at her. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "We didn't know what to do, Mom. We thought it would be too hard. The specialists, the therapy, it was all so much, and I don't know how to explain it." But Maggie didn't need an explanation. She didn't need to hear about the difficulties of raising a deaf child. She didn't care about the hardships they had imagined. What she cared about was that Ava was her grandchild. She was a child who deserved love, who deserved a family that would fight for her, not be discarded because she wasn't perfect in their eyes. The silence that followed was suffocating, and Maggie felt as though she might suffocate in it too. Ethan's face was full of regret, but it was regret without action. A regret that only seemed to exist because of the confrontation, not because of the actions that had led them to this point. Maggie's chest tightened as a surge of anger and heartbreak flooded through her. Ava had been rejected for something she couldn't control, something that didn't make her any less human, any less worthy of love, of family. And Ethan and Sophia had thrown her away for it. For what? To save themselves from the inconvenience of difference. She stared at Ethan and Sophia, her eyes blazing with emotion. Her voice came out in a strained whisper. "You didn't even try, you didn't even give her a chance." She could feel her hands trembling at her sides. How could you give her away without trying? How could you just give up? The silence that followed was unbearable, but it solidified Maggie's resolve. She couldn't change their decision, but she could change the outcome for Ava. She could find her. She could bring her home. Maggie turned on her heel, walking briskly toward the front door, her hands shaking but her mind clear. She had to move fast. There was no time to waste. She didn't look back at Ethan and Sophia. They had made their choice, and now it was time for her to make hers. Maggie rushed back to her car, her heart thudding in her chest. She had no time to waste on anger. She had no time to waste on regret. Ava was out there somewhere, and Maggie wasn't going to let her granddaughter grow up without the love she deserved. She wasn't going to let Ethan and Sophia's mistake define Ava's future. Maggie knew what she had to do. The first step was clear. She would learn American Sign Language. She would speak Ava's language, so when she found her, the first words Ava would hear from her grandmother would be, "I've been looking for you. I've never stopped." The thought gave her a sense of purpose, a fire that burned away the heartbreak, replacing it with something more powerful: resolve. She pulled out her phone, searching for local sign language classes. She didn't care if it was hard. She didn't care if it took years. She was going to find Ava, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Maggie clicked the link for a beginner's course starting that week. She signed up immediately, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. Then she turned her attention to the next step, finding a private investigator. She made the call and left a message. No more waiting, no more feeling helpless. This was her granddaughter. She was going to fight for her. Maggie knew the road ahead would be long, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Ava had a family who would fight for her. Maggie would be that family. She pulled out of the driveway and looked back at the house one last time. It would be the last time she came here for a long while. But no matter what happened, Ava was waiting, and Maggie would never stop looking. As Maggie drove away from Ethan and Sophia's house, her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. She felt a fire igniting inside her, a force stronger than any obstacle that had ever stood in her way. She wasn't going to let this go. Ava was out there, and Maggie was determined to find her. No matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. Her first stop was her hotel room, where she locked the door behind her and immediately opened her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keys, searching for adoption agencies, legal resources, private investigators, and anything that might give her a lead. The search results were overwhelming, but she ignored the sea of dead ends and focused on the few promising contacts she found. Adoption agencies, closed records, sealed files. The words seemed to taunt her, but she was relentless. She called every agency she could find in Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, and Rhode Island. Every time she heard that the records were sealed, that she wasn't legally allowed to access information, her frustration deepened, but so did her resolve. These people didn't understand. She wasn't just a stranger. She was Ava's grandmother. She moved on to the next step, learning American Sign Language. It was a daunting task, but Maggie threw herself into it with everything she had. She registered for every class she could find, including one that met at the local library in Greenwich. Each session, each lesson was another step toward connecting with Ava. The first class was difficult, and Maggie fumbled through her attempts at the alphabet, her fingers clumsy and slow. But she didn't care. She knew she had to master it. She had to be able to communicate with Ava, to let her know, in her own language, that she was loved, that she was wanted. Maggie also reached out to private investigators. She spent hours reading reviews, reaching out to the ones who seemed to have experience with cases like hers. But each call brought her back to the same frustrating conclusion. The adoption was closed. The records were sealed. Yet something inside her refused to give up. Each dead end only pushed her further into her pursuit. With every new call, every new lead, Maggie felt the weight of the task ahead of her, but she never hesitated. This was her granddaughter. She wasn't going to sit back and wait. She had to act, and she would. Finally, Maggie made one more call, this time to her office manager, Lee Carter. Lee had been with her for years, handling the day-to-day operations of Maggie's business. But today, she was going to handle something much more important. "Lee, it's Maggie," she said, her voice firm. "I need you to take over things here for the next few months. I'm going to be in the States for an extended period. I'll still be available for big decisions, but I need you to handle everything else. I've got a family situation I need to focus on." On the other end, Lee's voice was warm, understanding. "Of course, Maggie, I'll take care of everything. Just let me know what you need. Are you okay?" Maggie swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her again. She took a steadying breath. "I will be. Just need you to hold down the fort. I'm not coming back until I find my granddaughter." She hung up the phone and sank back in her chair, feeling the weight of her decisions settle over her. This wasn't just about finding a child. It was about making right what had been wronged, about righting a wrong that had been committed against her family. But Maggie wasn't just up against bureaucracy and closed records. She was up against time, against the distance that had already separated her from Ava for far too long. Maggie was 54, and she knew every day that passed was one more day that Ava spent without a family who truly loved her. She couldn't waste any more time. That night, Maggie stood in front of the bathroom mirror, her eyes meeting her reflection. She saw the lines of age beginning to form, the weariness in her eyes from years of hard work, and yet there was a fire there now, a fire that hadn't been there before. The search for Ava had awakened something in her, something fierce and unstoppable. "I'm coming for you, sweetheart," she whispered to the empty room, her voice soft but full of determination. "No matter how long it takes, no matter what I have to do, you will know you're loved, you will know you're wanted, and I will find you." As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, Maggie felt the weight of the task ahead of her, but she also felt something else. Hope. A quiet, determined hope that was beginning to grow stronger with every call, with every class, with every step she took toward finding Ava. Tomorrow, she would start again. And this time, she wasn't stopping until she had Ava in her arms. The Greenwich Library felt larger than Maggie had imagined as she walked through the wide, glass doors, her heels clicking against the polished tile floor. The scent of books, wood, and faintly brewed coffee filled the air. She had always loved libraries, the quiet, the order, the promise of knowledge. But today there was something else in the air, a nervous excitement, a weight on her shoulders that she couldn't shake. Today was the first day of her American Sign Language class, and the idea of learning a new language, one that relied so heavily on the fluid movements of her hands, felt daunting. It wasn't that Maggie wasn't intelligent or capable. She had managed a successful career in property management, traveled the world, and built a life in London. But this was different. This wasn't just learning a new skill. This was about connecting with her granddaughter, Ava, a child she had only just begun to understand. A child she needed to find, a child she needed to speak to in a way that made sense to her. She took a deep breath as she entered the classroom. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, and the room was filled with a mixture of nervous energy and curiosity. The group was small, maybe 10 people, all sitting around a large rectangular table, a few already practicing signs with their hands. Maggie slid into an empty seat at the far end of the table, her pulse quickening as she surveyed the room. Most of the others were younger, some college students, others professionals, each with their own reasons for learning. A few exchanged smiles, chatting in the language she had yet to learn. Maggie felt a pang of isolation, as though she were an outsider, watching a world she didn't yet understand. The teacher, Emma Wright, was a deaf woman, her short, dark hair cropped neatly around her face. Her presence was calm but authoritative, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had long ago embraced their identity. Emma stood in front of the class, smiling at them in a way that instantly made Maggie feel both welcome and very much out of place. "Welcome," Emma signed, her hands moving smoothly and with ease. Then she translated aloud, "I'm Emma, and I'll be guiding you through this journey of learning American Sign Language. We'll start with the basics today. Don't worry if you don't get it right away. It's all about practice, and we're here to help each other." Maggie nodded, her heart pounding. She didn't even know the basics. She had practiced the alphabet, but the letters felt stiff in her hands, and her fingers seemed to have minds of their own, clumsy and uncoordinated. She watched Emma sign again, the fluidity of the movements both mesmerizing and intimidating. Her hands felt like they might betray her. She was going to be hopeless at this. The class began with introductions. Maggie stumbled over her own name in sign, feeling the frustration rise as she struggled to form the simple letters. Emma smiled encouragingly, but it didn't ease the growing tension in Maggie's chest. She was used to being competent, to picking up skills quickly. This was different. She wasn't just learning for the sake of a new hobby. She was learning for Ava, and that pressure made every mistake feel like a failure. The lesson progressed, and Emma started teaching the first set of signs. simple greetings, common phrases. Maggie tried her best, but her fingers refused to form the shapes as smoothly as Emma. B looked like a C, and F and B got tangled up in her mind. She stumbled through the motions, feeling the weight of each mistake. By the end of the class, she was exhausted. Her hands were sore from the awkward movements, and her brain buzzed with information she couldn't quite retain. Emma closed the session by signing a simple phrase to the class. "Practice every day. It will get easier." Maggie nodded, but her doubt remained. Ava was out there somewhere, waiting for her, and Maggie had barely made it through one class without feeling lost. That evening, back in her hotel room, Maggie sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the textbook. She had to learn. She had to. Every missed sign, every fumbled gesture was a missed opportunity to connect with Ava, to tell her that she was loved. Maggie pulled her phone from her bag and began to search for more resources. She downloaded apps, watched videos, and even started recording her own attempts at signs in front of the bathroom mirror. But the practice didn't come easily. Her fingers ached, her memory faltered, and she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The days that followed were a blur of grocery store lines, hotel lobbies, and solitary evenings spent practicing signs. Whenever she found herself waiting, at the checkout counter, on the subway, or sitting in a cafe, Maggie would pull out her notebook and practice the alphabet. The more she practiced, the more the tension in her fingers seemed to ease. But the progress was slow, like watching a river carve through rock, inch by inch. Her old life in London, her home, her work, her friends, felt like a distant memory now. Maggie had traded that life for this mission, and as the weeks stretched on, she realized just how much she had left behind. The loneliness of being away from her family, the isolation of living in a hotel, and the endless repetition of signs began to weigh on her. She missed her own life, her routine, the simplicity of her days in London. But none of that mattered. She couldn't stop. Maggie took a deep breath, pushing her doubts aside. Every movement, every sign was one step closer to Ava. She had made a promise to her granddaughter, and nothing was going to stop her. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Maggie's determination only grew stronger. She was learning not just a new language, but a new way of life. Ava was waiting, and Maggie would find her. Every sign was a step toward that moment when she would finally hold her granddaughter in her arms and tell her that she had never been forgotten. And that moment was getting closer. Maggie sat in the corner of the small, dimly lit cafe in downtown Greenwich, her fingers absently stirring the cold cup of coffee in front of her. The steam had long since dissipated, leaving the bitter drink untouched. The space around her seemed distant, like a muffled world that couldn't break through the thick fog of frustration clouding her mind. Months had passed since she first arrived in Connecticut, and with each passing day, Ava seemed further away. The adoption agencies had refused to budge, the records remained sealed, and the leads, one by one, had turned into dead ends. Maggie had spent countless hours in offices, talking to lawyers, social workers, and caseworkers who were either too busy or too indifferent to help. Each phone call, each email felt like another brick added to the wall separating her from the granddaughter she had promised to find. The physical toll of the search had started to wear on her. Long nights spent poring over documents, endless hours on the road driving to one orphanage after another, each place offering little more than polite refusals and empty promises. Her body ached from the constant travel, from the restless nights spent in unfamiliar hotel rooms, where sleep never seemed to come. Her once neatly packed suitcase now seemed like a weight she couldn't shake off, a constant reminder of the years she had spent looking, searching, hopping. She had been to over 30 facilities in 3 states. She had seen the faces of hundreds of children, their expressions ranging from hopeful to apathetic. Ava's face, though, was a ghost she couldn't shake, haunting her every moment. She could picture her granddaughter clearly now, her small hands signing, her big brown eyes searching the crowd for someone, anyone who would take her in, who would love her. And yet, here Maggie was, still running in circles, still searching, still coming up empty. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her back into the present. She glanced at the screen, another email from the private investigator she had hired 3 months ago. "I'm sorry, Maggie. We've hit a dead end. The records are locked and the trail has gone cold. I recommend you try another route. It's time to accept that we might not be able to help you further." She read the message twice, the words stabbing into her chest like a cold, hard truth she didn't want to accept. Maggie had felt the walls closing in on her, but reading those words felt like an admission of defeat. Her stomach twisted, and she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But Maggie wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She took her phone and sent a quick message to her office manager, Lee Carter. "I'm hearing a new investigator. I can't stop now." Maggie closed the email and stared at the screen, her fingers trembling as she typed out a message to a new investigator. This one came recommended by someone in the deaf community. She had already done her research, and this man, Jameson Jamie Cross, had experience with cases like hers, where the records were sealed and the information was nearly impossible to get. She wasn't hopeful, but she couldn't stop herself from reaching out. "I've been searching for my granddaughter for months," she typed. "I know you're familiar with this type of case. Please let me know if you think there's any chance of success." She hit send and leaned back in her chair, her eyes closing briefly. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to be sitting in this cold cafe, chasing shadows. But she had to. Ava was still out there, and Maggie couldn't rest, couldn't allow herself to stop. The determination that had driven her since the moment she learned of her granddaughter's existence still burned fiercely within her. But that burning determination was beginning to feel like a burden. Her eyes were tired, her body exhausted. She was tired of driving down the same roads, of knocking on the same doors, of being told that she was powerless. She missed her family in London, her home, her friends, her routine. There were nights when she just wanted to pack up, get on a plane, and return to everything she knew. But then she thought of Ava alone, in an orphanage, or maybe with a family who didn't understand her, who didn't know her worth. Ava had been abandoned for something that couldn't be changed, something that wasn't her fault. Maggie couldn't leave her like that. She couldn't walk away, not until she had found her. The next day, Jamie Cross returned her call. His voice was steady, calm, professional. "I understand what you're going through," he said. "We can try a different angle. I've got some connections that might help. Let's give it a shot." And with that, something inside Maggie shifted. She had been beaten down by failure, by rejection, by frustration, but now there was a spark of hope, a glimmer of light at the end of a very long tunnel. She made the decision right then and there. She was going to keep going. The hours, the miles, the endless dead ends, they all felt insignificant compared to the one thing that mattered. Her granddaughter was out there, and no matter how long it took, Maggie was going to find her. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Jamie's investigation was different. He had a plan, a strategy that focused on tapping into the network of private adoption agencies, using his connections in ways that Maggie never could. There were setbacks, of course, more paperwork, more dead ends, but every small victory, every inch of progress felt like a step closer to Ava. Maggie knew the road ahead would be long, but now, with Jamie on her side, it felt different. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of optimism. She was one step closer. And that was enough for now. The cafe was bustling with energy, the hum of conversation blending with the clinking of coffee cups and the soft shuffle of chairs. But for Maggie, the world seemed to slow as she stood by the door, scanning the room. It had become a familiar scene, a small gathering of individuals, mostly deaf, who met once a month to talk, to share stories, and to strengthen the bonds of community. But for Maggie, it felt like stepping into an entirely new world. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the strap of her purse. She had been attending events like this for a while now, but each time, the feeling of being an outsider only grew stronger. The first time she had walked into a gathering like this, she had been met with polite smiles but guarded eyes. The deaf community, she quickly learned, was a tight-knit group, one that had experienced enough marginalization to be cautious with newcomers, especially hearing people who often saw them as different. Maggie wasn't just a stranger to them. She was a hearing person, someone who had no place in their world, at least not yet. But Maggie wasn't there just to observe. She wasn't there to be a tourist in their world. She was there to learn, to connect, and most importantly, to find Ava. She had spent months studying American Sign Language, stumbling over the basics, but now, with each meeting, she could feel herself becoming more comfortable. She was far from fluent, but at least she could understand enough to participate in conversations, even if her signs were still clumsy and slow. Maggie knew the importance of immersing herself in this culture, especially if she hoped to bridge the gap between herself and Ava. But the challenge was bigger than learning a language. It was about understanding a world that had been shut off from her for so long, a world that held the key to the granddaughter she so desperately wanted to find. As she entered the cafe, she spotted Chloe Dawson sitting at a table near the window, her hands moving gracefully through the air as she signed with another woman. Chloe had been a teacher at a deaf school in Hartford, and their paths had crossed at several events before. Maggie knew that Chloe was one of the few people who might understand the depth of her mission. Chloe was deaf, but she had always been open and welcoming to Maggie, something Maggie was grateful for, though she couldn't help but feel the weight of her outsider status each time they met. Maggie approached the table, and Chloe looked up, her face lighting up with a warm smile. Chloe signed a greeting, and Maggie responded with a shaky wave before attempting a simple hello. Her sign was a bit off, but Chloe nodded encouragingly. "Hi, Maggie, it's good to see you again," Chloe said aloud, then added, "How's the search going?" Maggie sat down, her heart sinking a little as she recalled the endless dead ends. "I'm still looking. I'm not giving up, but I don't have many leads. The adoption agencies have been no help. The records are sealed, and I'm running out of options." Chloe's expression softened, her eyes compassionate. She had heard Maggie's story before, and though Maggie had explained her desperation to find Ava, Chloe knew the odds were slim. But Chloe didn't offer pity. She didn't offer empty words of encouragement. Instead, she signed, "I know it's been hard, but you've made it this far. And you're doing the right thing. Let's keep looking." There was something about Chloe's confidence, the way she spoke with her hands, that grounded Maggie. Chloe wasn't just another person with sympathy. She was a person who understood what it meant to be marginalized, to fight against a system that didn't care. Chloe had built a life in this community, and she wasn't afraid to fight for what was right, even if it meant standing alone. The next few weeks became a blur of community meetups, school events, and social gatherings. Maggie attended them all, immersing herself in the deaf community as much as possible. She learned how to respectfully approach people, how to ask questions without making them feel like they were being studied. She learned about the nuances of deaf culture, the history, the struggles, the triumphs. She learned that being deaf wasn't just about losing a sense. It was about having a different way of seeing the world, a way of living that had been ignored or misunderstood by so many hearing people for far too long. And through it all, Chloe was there, signing to Maggie, guiding her, offering wisdom from a perspective Maggie could never fully understand, but was determined to learn. Chloe knew the deaf world from the inside out, and Maggie began to trust her guidance, even when it meant confronting uncomfortable truths about her own assumptions and biases. One day, after a meeting at the local coffee shop, Chloe pulled Maggie aside and signed, "I've been thinking, I might know someone who can help you with your search. There's a deaf school in Hartford, and they have a network of families. Maybe they know something." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. She had been to so many orphanages, adoption agencies, and schools, but no one had ever offered such a direct lead. Chloe's willingness to step in and help made Maggie feel like maybe, just maybe, this could be the breakthrough she needed. "I don't know if they'll be able to help, but it's worth a try," Chloe added, her face serious but hopeful. "Thank you," Maggie signed back, her eyes filling with gratitude. She had never felt more a part of something, more connected to a community than she did in that moment. Through Chloe, Maggie began to realize just how much she had underestimated the power of community. It wasn't just about finding information or leads. It was about finding the people who could offer support, who could share their knowledge and connections, and who could help make Ava feel like she wasn't alone in the world. As Maggie left the cafe that afternoon, she felt a renewed sense of hope. She was no longer just a grandmother desperately searching for a child. She was part of something bigger now. She had the deaf community behind her, and with their help, she knew that she could get closer to bringing Ava home. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Maggie could hardly breathe as she drove down the long, winding highway that led to Richmond, Virginia. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and her knuckles were white from the pressure. The radio was off, and the silence in the car felt suffocating, a stark contrast to the chaotic whirlwind of emotions swirling in her chest. After years of relentless searching, months of dead ends, unanswered calls, and fruitless visits, she finally had a lead. A real lead. The call had come 2 days ago, out of nowhere, from a social worker named Rebecca Lawson. She had heard about Maggie's search through a contact in the deaf community and thought she might know something important. A girl. A deaf girl. She'd been in foster care for most of her life, and Rebecca suspected there might be a connection to the little girl Maggie had been searching for all these years. The timelines matched. The circumstances seemed eerily familiar. The excitement had crashed into Maggie like a wave. She had barely slept the night before, mind racing with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Could this be the breakthrough she'd been praying for? Could this be the moment when everything finally fell into place? Or was it yet another cruel twist of fate, another false lead that would lead her nowhere? As she crossed into Virginia, Maggie felt the weight of uncertainty bearing down on her. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the rearview mirror, eyes scanning the road ahead. Every mile marker felt like a countdown. The distance between her and the orphanage in Richmond seemed to stretch endlessly. The excitement she had felt when Rebecca first called had started to waver, replaced by a knot of skepticism in the pit of her stomach. How many times had she been here before, only to face disappointment? How many times had she driven to a place, hopping, praying for a miracle, only to leave empty-handed? But she couldn't let herself pull back now. This lead was different. Rebecca Lawson wasn't offering false hope, she sounded certain. And Maggie had promised herself, after all these years, that she wouldn't stop until she had exhausted every single possibility. The sun was setting as she finally arrived in Richmond. The city looked almost quiet, with its cobbled streets and old buildings casting long shadows as the light dipped lower on the horizon. Maggie pulled up to the orphanage, a large brick building with a quiet playground out back. A few children played outside, but there were no signs of the chaos of a bustling facility. It was a peaceful place, almost too quiet. She parked her car and sat for a moment, staring at the building in front of her. The fear and uncertainty crept back into her chest like a slow, inevitable tide. What if this was a mistake? What if Ava wasn't here? What if she'd gone through all this for nothing? Number Maggie wouldn't allow herself to think that way. She couldn't. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door of her car and stepped out. The cool evening air hit her face, but she hardly noticed the chill. She had one goal now, to meet the girl who might be her granddaughter. As Maggie walked up to the front door of the orphanage, the enormity of what was happening hit her all at once. Her mind raced, her thoughts colliding in a chaotic jumble. What if this was Ava? What if this was the moment? Would she recognize her? Would she even know how to talk to her? She knocked on the door, her heart beating faster now. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman in her late 30s, her tired eyes scanning Maggie as she introduced herself. "You must be Maggie Harper," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Rebecca Lawson. I'm so glad you could make it. Please come in." Maggie followed Rebecca inside, her eyes searching the walls, the rooms. Everything about the building was functional, but there was something sterile about it. No warmth, no family photos, no signs of life other than the children she could hear playing outside. Rebecca led Maggie to a small office in the back of the building, where they sat down. Maggie felt the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. She had come so far, and now, here she was, sitting just steps away from the girl who might be her granddaughter. She couldn't help the knot that tightened in her throat. "Tell me everything you know," Maggie said, her voice quiet but filled with urgency. Rebecca nodded, taking a deep breath. "We have a girl here. Her name is Ellen. She's been with us for several years now. She's deaf and she's 12 years old. She's been in foster care most of her life, but nobody has ever adopted her. The circumstances surrounding her placement here are complicated." Maggie's heart skipped a beat as she listened. The age matched. The deafness matched. This could be her granddaughter. "Can I see her?" Maggie asked, the words rushing out before she could stop them. Rebecca hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Of course. She's outside during recreation time. Let's go." They walked through the building, past a cafeteria and some playrooms, until they reached the back door that opened into a playground. A few children were playing basketball, others climbing on the jungle gym. And there, sitting alone on a bench near the fence, was a small girl with dark hair tied back into a ponytail. She was staring at the ground, her posture slumped as she watched the other kids from a distance. "She keeps to herself," Rebecca said softly. "She's been passed over so many times. Families come, they meet the kids, and they choose someone else. After a while, I think she stopped hopping." Maggie's heart cracked as she saw the girl sitting there, so alone. It was like a scene out of a nightmare, her granddaughter, alone in this cold, unfamiliar world, waiting for someone who would never come. Maggie took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what she expected, but the girl's face, so familiar, yet so foreign, caught her breath. She signed slowly, "Hello, my name is Maggie." The girl looked up, startled at first, then hesitant. Slowly, she signed back, "I'm Ellen." The recognition was instant, like a spark igniting deep inside Maggie's chest. Her heart raced as she stepped closer to Ellen, taking in the small birthmark on her shoulder that matched the one Ethan had. Everything about this moment felt surreal, like she was stepping into a dream she hadn't dared to have. This was it. This was Ava. But there was so much more to confirm, so many pieces still to fit together. Maggie could hardly breathe as she looked at the girl who might be her granddaughter. Was this the moment she had been waiting for? Or was this another painful step in a long road of uncertainty? Maggie took a deep breath, knowing one thing for sure. She couldn't stop now. No matter what happened next, she was one step closer to bringing Ellen or Ava home. The world seemed to slow down as Maggie took tentative steps toward the bench where Ava sat, her small figure slouched in quiet isolation. Every inch Maggie moved forward felt like an eternity, each heartbeat loud in her ears, each breath a fragile thing. She wasn't sure what she expected, but nothing could have prepared her for the gravity of this moment. The girl in front of her, a stranger, and yet somehow not, held the answers Maggie had been searching for all these years. Ava, or whoever she was, looked up slowly as Maggie approached, her eyes widening just slightly at the sight of the older woman walking toward her. There was an awkwardness in the way the two women regarded one another, a silent dance of uncertainty and curiosity, neither sure of the other's intentions. Maggie stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to sit down or stand. She didn't want to overwhelm the girl, but every second felt like it was pushing her closer to a precipice. She had dreamed of this moment, this meeting, this first contact, countless times. But now that she was here, the reality was much more overwhelming than she had anticipated. She had come so far, but there were still so many unknowns. With a tentative gesture, Maggie signed, "Hello, my name is Maggie." Ava blinked, and for a moment there was only silence between them. Maggie's stomach fluttered nervously, but then, slowly, Ava raised her hands, forming the words in slow, uncertain movements. "I'm Ellen." Maggie felt her breath catch. Ellen. She had been calling her Ava in her mind for so long, but hearing the name Ellen, the name the orphanage had given her, was like a punch to the gut. It felt so wrong, so out of place, but it was also the first sign that this could be her granddaughter. The woman who had been searching for so many years had finally found the girl who had slipped through the cracks. Maggie nodded, her heart racing. She didn't know what to say next, but there was a powerful pull in her chest, an overwhelming urge to bridge the gap between them, to reach out and make this connection real. She signed again, her movements slower now, more deliberate. "I think we might be family." There was a long pause, and Maggie watched Ava closely, looking for some hint of recognition, some flicker of understanding in her eyes. But Ava's face remained unreadable, her posture stiff, as though she were bracing herself for something that might never come. "Family," Ava signed, her fingers moving slowly, unsure of the meaning. Maggie's heart sank slightly at the uncertainty in the girl's signs. But then, something shifted in Ava's expression, the smallest hint of curiosity creeping into her eyes. Maggie stepped closer, feeling a lump form in her throat. She couldn't look away from Ava's face, trying to find a sign, a trace of something familiar. She reached out, her hands trembling, and signed the word for grandmother. The signs were hesitant, but Ava was watching her closely now, her brow furrowing slightly. The girl's eyes darted to Maggie's face, then down to her hands, as though she was trying to decode a message from a world she hadn't fully embraced. I'm your grandmother, Maggie signed carefully, her heart beating wildly in her chest. The words hung in the air between them, vulnerable and raw. She wasn't sure if Ava understood or if Ava even cared. But Maggie couldn't stop herself. She had to try. It was then that Ava shifted on the bench, turning slightly so that her left shoulder was exposed. Maggie's heart stopped. The birthmark, the small, faint mark shaped like a comma on Ava's shoulder. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. It was the same as the one on Ethan's shoulder, the mark that had never left Maggie's mind, the mark that had haunted her dreams, the mark she had always believed would be the sign that would prove her granddaughter's identity. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Maggie reached out and gently touched Ava's shoulder, the skin still warm from the sun. She couldn't help it. The gesture felt like a validation, like the world had stopped spinning for just a moment. She wasn't imagining this. She wasn't searching in vain. She felt Ava tense at the touch, but it wasn't the sharp recoil of rejection Maggie feared. Instead, Ava seemed to freeze, her hands hovering in midair as if unsure how to respond to this unfamiliar gesture of affection. Maggie lowered her hand, realizing what she had done but not regretting it. Ava was still unsure, still confused, but Maggie knew now. This girl, this child, was hers. This was Ellen, and she was Ava, the granddaughter Maggie had spent years searching for, fighting for. Maggie's heart swelled, but it was a bittersweet swell. She wanted to run to her, to hold her, to scream with joy that she had found her. But she knew better. Ava had been hurt by abandonment, by years of rejection. Maggie couldn't rush her. She couldn't force her to feel anything she wasn't ready for. But she could be here. She could be patient. She could prove to Ava that she was wanted. Maggie signed once more, her hands steady now, her voice silent but clear in the language she had learned just for this moment. I've been looking for you for a long time, Ava. I never stopped. You are loved. You are wanted. Ava stared at her, her eyes wide. For the first time since they had met, Maggie saw something shift in her gaze, a flicker of hope, of curiosity. The walls that had been so carefully built seemed to crack just a little. For the first time in years, Maggie dared to believe that this was the moment she had been waiting for. Ava was here, and so was Maggie, finally close enough to bridge the gap. The next step was hers to take. The next step was about proving that she wasn't going anywhere. The days following Ava's tentative acceptance of Maggie's presence were a whirlwind of uncertainty, anticipation, and hope. Maggie could still feel the warmth of that moment when she had touched the small birthmark on Ava's shoulder, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Maggie needed confirmation, needed to know with absolute certainty that this was the granddaughter she had searched for all these years. The DNA test was the only way. The clinic was sterile and quiet, the kind of place that smelled faintly of antiseptic, where the staff smiled politely but distant, as if they had seen so many hopeful, anxious people before. Maggie clutched the paperwork in her hands as they led her and Ava into a small, brightly lit room. Ava was hesitant at first, her eyes darting around the room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. She was still unsure, still guarded, but something had shifted in the days that had passed. Maggie had spent time with her, really spent time with her, learning her likes and dislikes, talking with her in signs and gestures, taking things slow. She had seen a glimmer of trust in Ava's eyes, and it was something Maggie clung to desperately. But there was still a long way to go. The nurse explained the procedure in simple terms, instructing them both to provide a cheek swab for the DNA test. Maggie couldn't keep the nervousness from creeping into her voice, her hands trembling slightly as the nurse handed her the swab. She couldn't bear to think of the possibility that this could be a mistake, that this moment, this fragile connection they were forming, might dissolve into nothing. As the nurse swabbed Ava's cheek, Maggie couldn't help but watch her granddaughter, wondering if this was really happening. Was she about to learn the truth? Was she about to find out if Ava was really hers? The weight of it all hung in the air like 1,000 unspoken words. She could hardly breathe as the swabs were sealed into plastic vials, the results set to be sent off to the lab for analysis. The test was simple, routine even, but for Maggie, it felt like her entire life was hanging in the balance. The ride back to the orphanage felt longer than the trip there. Ava had said little, her usual reserved demeanor taking over again, but Maggie noticed small changes. Ava was no longer shutting her down with a cold silence. Instead, they shared quiet meals together, small conversations in signs that were becoming easier for both of them. Maggie found herself smiling more now. Ava's small, hesitant smiles, her quick laughter when Maggie fumbled a sign, or when Maggie tried to cook a dish Ava recognized from her childhood. Slowly, like the warm sun breaking through a cloudy sky, a bond was forming, fragile but real. That night, Maggie sat in her hotel room, the silence pressing in from all sides. She couldn't stop her mind from racing. She thought about the years of searching, the countless hours spent making phone calls, writing emails, driving to dead-end leads. She thought about the moments of doubt, the crushing loneliness, the exhaustion that had almost made her give up. There had been times, so many times, when she had sat in her car, tears staining her cheeks, wondering if it was all a hopeless dream. Ava had always been out of reach. But now there was a chance. There was a possibility that the girl sitting in the next room, watching TV in the small bed she had set up in the corner of the room, was really her granddaughter. Maggie lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every part of the journey. She thought of Ethan, of how he had dismissed Ava, his own daughter, as defective, a burden too great to bear. How had he let it get to this point? How had he, the boy she had raised, the one she had loved, cast away his own child so easily? And Sophia, how had she stood by that decision? How had they both been so blind to the love that Ava deserved? Maggie couldn't fathom it, couldn't make sense of the coldness they had shown their own flesh and blood. But then, as her mind wandered back to the present, to the girl in the next room, Maggie felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't about Ethan and Sophia anymore. This was about Ava. It always had been. Maggie wasn't going to stop, not now. No matter the outcome of the test, Ava was her granddaughter, and Maggie had a lifetime of love to give her. The following days dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. Maggie found herself staring at her phone more than she'd like to admit, waiting for the call that would either confirm or destroy everything. She tried to keep busy, more classes, more conversations with Ava, more plans to get to know her, but the truth was, she was a woman on the edge of a precipice, and the weight of it all threatened to swallow her whole. Finally, the call came. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Maggie was sitting on the couch in her hotel room, scrolling through her notes on Ava's medical history. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Maggie jumped, her heart leaping into her throat as she quickly answered. "Hello," her voice came out a little too shaky. "Maggie Harper." The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Yes, this is Maggie. Is it the results?" She could barely manage the words. "Yes, I have the results here," the voice said, and Maggie could hear the sound of paper shuffling. "I'm pleased to confirm the DNA test results show a 99.7% match. Ava is indeed your granddaughter." The words hit Maggie like a wave crashing against rocks. She felt her knees weaken, and for a moment, she could do nothing but sit there, her chest tightening with an overwhelming mix of relief and joy. "Thank you," Maggie whispered, her voice cracking. "Thank you so much." She hung up, but her hands shook so badly that she couldn't hold the phone properly. Ava was hers. She was real. She wasn't just a dream anymore. Maggie felt her heart swell with a mixture of relief, love, and something she had forgotten to allow herself to feel: hope. She got up from the bed, the news still sinking in. She had found her granddaughter. And now, it was time to bring her home. The phone call had barely ended when Maggie sank back onto the bed, her hands trembling as the enormity of the moment hit her. Ava was hers. The truth, the certainty she had been chasing for so long, had finally arrived. It was a fact, a proof, a name on a piece of paper that confirmed what her heart had known all along. Maggie stared at her phone, still holding it in her hands, though she wasn't sure what she was doing with it anymore. Her mind raced, memories of the years of searching flashing before her eyes, every disappointing dead end, every rejection, every moment when she had doubted herself. There had been times, so many times, when it felt like the walls were closing in, when the road ahead seemed too dark to navigate. And yet, here she was, with the proof in her hands, the answer she had been waiting for. Ava was her granddaughter. The weight of the past few years, the years of emotional exhaustion, the sacrifices she had made, the endless questions that had plagued her thoughts, began to lift, slowly at first, like the lifting of a heavy fog. But with that weight gone came something else, an overwhelming sense of relief. Maggie felt like she could finally breathe again after so long in the grip of uncertainty. She looked out the window, her eyes scanning the quiet street. The world outside seemed unchanged, but everything inside her had shifted. Ava, her granddaughter, was no longer a distant hope. She was real, standing just a few rooms away. Maggie felt the truth settle deep in her chest. This was not the end of the journey, it was the beginning of a new one. But Ava's past couldn't be erased. Maggie knew that. The truth of Ava's abandonment, the harshness of being discarded for something she couldn't control, was still there, etched into her heart, no matter how much Maggie wished it away. Ava had spent 12 years in an orphanage, waiting to be chosen, waiting for someone to love her. Ava had been passed over time and time again, her worth measured in ways that Maggie couldn't even begin to understand. And now, at 12 years old, she had become someone who was cautious with affection, guarded with her trust. Maggie stood up from the bed, her legs shaky as the full weight of the responsibility ahead of her settled in. Ava needed more than just a grandmother. She needed time. She needed healing. She needed to understand that this time, it wasn't going to be the same. Maggie wasn't going anywhere, but she also knew that it was going to take a lot for Ava to believe that, to accept her. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and steps to begin the adoption process. Maggie had already spoken with the lawyer who had been helping her with the search, and now, with the DNA confirmation in hand, the adoption was within reach. She arranged to meet with social workers, making sure that Ava's transition into her home was as smooth as possible. There was still much to be done, background checks, home studies, paperwork, but Maggie was already moving ahead, her determination unwavering. She hadn't told Ava yet, not completely, not the full extent of what the DNA results meant, not that, with these results, everything would change for both of them. She had only told her that she was her grandmother, that she was here to stay. Ava had listened, nodded, but there had been no outpouring of emotion, no recognition that this moment was life-changing for them both. Ava was still too guarded, too uncertain, too broken from years of abandonment to fully embrace what was happening. But Maggie wasn't giving up. She knew it was going to take time, Ava's trust, her acceptance, her love, but Maggie was patient. She had waited 12 years for this moment, and she could wait a little longer for Ava to truly believe in her. That evening, after a quiet dinner together, Maggie sat down across from Ava. She could feel the distance still there, the hesitance in the way Ava held herself. But Maggie wasn't afraid. She knew this would take time, and she was more than willing to give it. Ava, Maggie began softly, her hands moving slowly as she signed, I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm here, and I'm going to be here for you no matter what. Ava watched her, her face unreadable, her hands folded in her lap. There was a quiet hesitation in her eyes, a silent question that Maggie knew would take time to answer. I know things have been hard, Maggie continued, her voice steady, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry you had to go through so much, but now you don't have to be alone anymore. You have me, and I will always be here for you. There was a long silence, the kind that stretched between them, thick and unspoken. Ava didn't reply right away. She didn't sign back. She just sat there, her gaze distant. Maggie could see the struggle in her face, the internal battle between wanting to believe in this new reality and being afraid of the hurt it might bring. But then, after what felt like an eternity, Ava's hands moved, slow and hesitant. She signed something Maggie had come to understand, though it was simple and it wasn't much. Okay. Maggie's heart swelled, but she kept her composure. This was a small step, but it was a step, a real one, the first sign of trust. The first sign that Ava was beginning to believe, just a little, that maybe this time it could be different. Maggie smiled gently and signed back. "I'm so proud of you. You're safe now. You don't have to be scared anymore." And for the first time, Maggie saw a small shift in Ava's eyes, a flicker of something warm, something soft. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Ava was beginning to accept her, beginning to accept this new reality. And that was the beginning. Ava would need time, more time than Maggie could give in a single day. But with each passing moment, they were building something real, something that would outlast the years of abandonment, something that would carry them both through the struggles ahead. And Maggie knew, deep down, that despite the hurdles, despite the pain of the past, they were finally on the right path. A path toward healing, toward love, and toward a family, one that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. The dinner table was quiet, the faint clinking of silverware on plates the only sound filling the room. Maggie sat across from Ava, her granddaughter, and Lucas, the young man she had recently learned was the son of Ethan and Sophia, her estranged son and daughter-in-law. The scene was so different from the one she had imagined years ago. She had thought this dinner would be full of laughter, of reconnecting, of rebuilding the family that had been torn apart. But the tension in the room was palpable, and a thick, uncomfortable silence hung in the air. Lucas was quiet, his face etched with worry as he pushed his food around his plate, glancing nervously at both Ava and Maggie. There was an unease in his eyes, something that Maggie couldn't quite place, but she had a growing suspicion that something deeper was at play. She had learned of Lucas's existence only a few days ago, and though he had been raised by Ethan and Sophia, there was something about him that didn't sit right. He was kind, respectful, but there was a sense of guilt that seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders. Maggie had spoken to him briefly earlier in the day, and she sensed that there was more to his story than he was letting on. Finally, as Ava excused herself to go to her room, the silence between Maggie and Lucas stretched on. Lucas shifted in his seat, his hands trembling slightly before he set his fork down and looked at Maggie. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Something about my parents, about how I came to be adopted." Maggie's heart tightened. She had been waiting for this moment, but she didn't expect it to come like this, so suddenly, so raw. She watched Lucas carefully, sensing that this confession was going to unravel a truth that would shake everything she thought she knew about her family. "Go ahead," Maggie said, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. She leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped together in her lap. "I'm listening." Lucas swallowed hard and looked down at his hands. "When I was younger," he began, his voice faltering slightly, "I always thought my adoption was a blessing. My parents gave me a home when I needed one. They loved me." Maggie's mind raced as she listened, but she remained silent, letting Lucas speak. "But I've learned things since then. Things I wish I didn't know," he continued, his words coming faster now, as though the truth was slipping out of him before he could stop it. "The adoption wasn't as pure as they made it seem. It wasn't about giving me a family, it was about giving them something they could use. They wanted me, because of what I represented." Maggie felt a pang in her chest, but she didn't interrupt. Lucas was still speaking, but his eyes were downcast, guilt written all over his face. "I found out a few months ago that my parents, Ethan and Sophia, they adopted me for one reason," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't because they loved me. It was because they thought it would solve their problems, financial problems." Maggie's stomach twisted as she absorbed his words. Her son, Ethan, the boy she had raised, the one who had always been so determined, so strong, had done this, had manipulated the situation for money. It was the last thing she could have ever imagined. Lucas continued, his voice cracking as the guilt seemed to weigh even more heavily on him. They wanted the financial benefits that come with adoption. They knew that adopting a child would help them look good, help them with their image. They thought it would fix their problems, but they didn't understand that it wasn't a solution. It was manipulation. It was selfish. And I've always known deep down that I was just part of their plan. Maggie's mind was spinning. Her son had adopted Lucas to solve his own financial woes. It didn't make sense. Ethan had always been proud, always wanting to appear successful in the eyes of others, but this was beyond anything Maggie had ever imagined. I thought it was my fault at first, Lucas admitted, looking up at Maggie with a mixture of sorrow and shame in his eyes. That maybe I wasn't enough. That maybe I wasn't worth keeping. But now I see it wasn't about me. It was about them. About the money, about the image they wanted to project. They didn't care about me, not the way they should have. Maggie felt the ground beneath her shift, the weight of this new revelation crashing down on her. Her son, the man she had raised, the man she had hoped would be a better person than this, had used a child as a means to an end. I know you're probably shocked, Lucas said, looking away now, his voice full of regret. And you probably hate me for being part of it, but I need you to know I never wanted to be part of their scheme. I've been trying to make up for it, to make sense of everything, and I needed to tell you the truth. Maggie sat back, her mind reeling. There was a part of her that wanted to scream at Ethan, wanted to shake him and demand answers, but the other part of her, the part that had raised him, that had loved him, was broken. How had this happened? How had she missed the signs? Ethan had always been so proud of his family, so determined to make them look perfect to the outside world. And now she realized the truth. It had all been a facade. And in the process, they had broken Ava, her real daughter, her granddaughter, along with Lucas. I don't hate you, Lucas, Maggie said, her voice soft but steady. But I do hate what your parents did, what they did to you, what they did to Ava. This is a mess, but I'm not giving up on you. Lucas looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude, mixed with shame. He was a young man caught between the truth and the manipulation of his adoptive parents, and Maggie knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There was so much healing to do, so many questions left unanswered. You're not alone, Lucas, Maggie added, her voice firm though tinged with sadness. I'm here, and I will fight for you and Ava. Lucas nodded slowly, a faint, uncertain smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He knew the road ahead was going to be long, but he had taken the first step toward something real, something that could give him the family he had always wanted, not the one his parents had created for him, but the one he had always deserved. The truth was out now, and for better or worse, Maggie was going to help Lucas navigate the fallout from Ethan and Sophia's decisions. This wasn't just about Ava anymore. This was about Lucas, too. Both of them were part of her family, and Maggie wasn't going to let anyone tear that apart, not even her son. The tension was thick, but the door had been opened. And Maggie would help Lucas and Ava heal, together, piece by piece, no matter how long it took. The evening before the meeting, the air in the house was heavy with anticipation. Maggie and Ava sat in the living room, the only light coming from the dim glow of a single lamp in the corner. The silence between them was almost suffocating, but it wasn't uncomfortable. They didn't need words. They had spent the last few months building a tentative bond, slowly learning how to navigate this new, fragile family dynamic. But this was something else entirely. The next day, they were going to confront Ethan and Sophia, her son and daughter-in-law, the people who had abandoned Ava when she was just a baby, who had decided she wasn't worth keeping because of a single, immutable trait, her deafness. Maggie had been fighting for this moment for years, but now that it was on the horizon, she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was the reckoning. Ava's truth would finally be spoken. Ava sat across from Maggie, her expression unreadable. She was no longer the quiet, withdrawn girl who had first arrived in Maggie's life. There was a strength in her now, a resilience that Maggie could see even in the way she held herself. But there was also a wariness, a hesitance about tomorrow. Ava had grown, but the scars of the past, of being cast aside, still lingered beneath the surface. Maggie could see them in the way Ava's hands fidgeted in her lap, in the slight twitch of her lips. I don't know what I'm going to say to them, Ava said quietly, breaking the silence, her voice barely a whisper. She looked up at Maggie, her eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and quiet resolve. They abandoned me. I've spent so many years wondering why. I was just a baby, Maggie. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be different. Maggie's heart broke as she watched Ava, seeing the deep, hidden hurt that still festered within her. It was a pain that Maggie could never fully understand, but she knew it was there, buried beneath the layers of Ava's calm exterior. You don't have to say anything you're not ready for, Maggie replied softly, reaching across the table to take Ava's hand. But I'll be there with you every step of the way. This is about your truth. You are allowed to tell it however you need to. You are allowed to feel whatever you feel tomorrow. Ava nodded slowly, squeezing Maggie's hand in return. I don't know if I'll ever forgive them, she said, her voice trembling. But I need to know why they did this, why they left me. I need to hear them say it. Maggie felt the weight of those words sink deep into her chest. It was a question that Ava had been asking for 12 years, a question that had never been answered. Ethan and Sophia had never acknowledged the harm they had done, the pain they had caused. And tomorrow, Maggie knew, that would have to change. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting time, the tension between them grew. Maggie had spent the last few nights preparing, making sure everything was in place. The meeting would take place at Maggie's house, a neutral ground, somewhere Ava could feel safe. She had already arranged the details with Ethan and Sophia, who had reluctantly agreed to meet with her after years of silence. Their responses had been filled with guilt, but Maggie could sense that they had their own reasons for wanting to meet. Perhaps they thought this would be their chance to reconcile, to explain. But Maggie wasn't interested in reconciliation. Not yet. Tomorrow wasn't about forgiveness. It was about truth. The morning of the meeting, Maggie stood at the window, watching the cars pass by in the street. She hadn't felt this uneasy in years. Ethan was her son, her only son. The boy she had raised, the boy who had once been full of promise, full of dreams for the future. To think that he could abandon his own child, that he could throw away a baby simply because she was deaf, it was unfathomable. Maggie had been forced to keep that truth buried deep, to keep silent for so long. But now the time had come. She turned around, taking a deep breath, and looked at Ava, who was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Ava, you don't have to do this, Maggie said, her voice filled with the tenderness only a grandmother could have. I'll stand by you, whatever you decide, but I want you to know I've never stopped fighting for you. Ava met her gaze, the walls that had once been so high now coming down slowly, brick by brick. She took a step forward, her eyes locked on Maggie. I want this. I want answers. And I want to know that I'm not just someone they threw away. I want them to hear me. And I want them to know that I'm not broken. I'm not defective. Maggie felt the knot in her chest loosen as she saw the fierce determination in Ava's eyes. Ava wasn't the scared little girl she had once been. She had become strong. She was no longer just the child who had been abandoned. She was the woman who was ready to reclaim her identity, her truth. At precisely 3:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. Maggie felt the ground shift beneath her feet, but she didn't falter. This was it, the moment of truth. She opened the door to find Ethan and Sophia standing there, their expressions stiff, almost apologetic, but there was a guardedness to them that Maggie immediately noticed. Their eyes darted briefly to Ava, and then back to Maggie, but they didn't say anything. They just stood there, waiting. Come in, Maggie said, her voice calm but firm. She led them to the living room, where the tension between them thickened with every step. Once they were seated, there was a long, uncomfortable silence. Ethan fidgeted with his hands, looking everywhere except at Ava, while Sophia kept her eyes down, her lips pressed tightly together. It was as if they were both waiting for someone else to speak, as if they didn't know where to start. Maggie took a deep breath, her gaze hardening as she looked at Ethan and Sophia. She knew that this conversation would never be easy, but it was necessary. For Ava, for herself. I'm not here for apologies, Maggie began, her voice steady, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. I'm here because Ava needs to know the truth. She deserves that much. And she's here because she's done being your secret. She's done being abandoned. And so am I. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid for so many years. Ethan looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the room, but Sophia remained still, her face expressionless. I need to know why, Ava finally spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. Why did you give me up? Why didn't you want me? The question lingered, hanging between them all. It was a question Maggie had asked herself countless times. And now, Ava was finally asking it of the people who had denied her, who had tossed her aside for no other reason than the simple fact that she was deaf. The answer, Maggie knew, could change everything. But would they even be able to give one? The silence that followed was deafening. The truth was about to break free, and there would be no turning back. The days following the confrontation were filled with a quiet kind of healing, a slow, deliberate process that could never undo the pain of the past, but could, at least, begin to soften the edges. The truth about Ava's abandonment, the years of silence and rejection, had finally been spoken. Ethan and Sophia had no answers that could ever justify what they had done, but the truth had been laid bare. And for the first time in years, Maggie felt the heavy weight of the unknown lifting. In the weeks that followed, Ava's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. The walls that had once surrounded her heart were slowly coming down. She had started to believe in herself again, to see that her worth wasn't determined by the people who had rejected her. Maggie saw it in the way Ava smiled more, the way she allowed herself to rest in the warmth of family, and in the little moments where she reached out for connection, instead of holding back in fear. It wasn't easy, and it would take time, but the foundation was there. Lucas, too, had begun to settle into this new family dynamic. His guilt had never fully dissipated, but with every passing day, he began to feel the weight of his past actions lifting just a little. He had opened up to Maggie and Ava, admitted the role he had played in his adoptive parents' manipulations, and in doing so, he had started the difficult work of redemption. For Lucas, this family wasn't just about being accepted, it was about proving he was worthy of that acceptance. Maggie saw the sincerity in his eyes as he began to form a bond with Ava, his relationship with her growing stronger with each passing day. The three of them, Maggie, Ava, and Lucas, slowly found their rhythm together. Their lives had been shaped by pain, by betrayal, by rejection, but now they were starting anew. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't have a perfect family, but they had something real. They had each other. Maggie watched them both one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, laughing over dinner. Ava was signing something to Lucas, who was still learning, but it was clear that they were growing closer, communicating in a way Maggie had never imagined possible when she first set foot in this journey. There was joy in their shared laughter, in the comfort they found in each other's presence. Maggie sat back in her chair, a soft smile on her lips, watching the family she had fought so hard to create. Her heart swelled with pride. The road had been long, and the pain had been great, but this was the beginning of something new. A new family. One built not on the past, but on the love and resilience that had been forged in the fire of everything they had survived. Ava turned to Maggie, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. "Can we go to that movie tomorrow, the one you said you wanted to see?" Maggie's heart fluttered at the simple request. She realized then just how far they had come. Just a few months ago, Ava had barely spoken to her, and now, here she was, asking about something as simple as a movie outing. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. And that was all that mattered. "Of course, sweetheart," Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion. "We can go, I'd love that." Lucas joined in, his voice light and teasing. "Can I come too, or is this a girls-only thing?" Ava rolled her eyes playfully. "You can come, but only if you promise not to talk through the whole movie." Maggie couldn't help but laugh. Lucas smiled sheepishly and raised his hands in surrender, knowing full well that he had a tendency to talk too much. But that was the beauty of this moment. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about living. Laughing. Enjoying the simple, everyday moments that had once been beyond their reach. That evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, Maggie paused and took a moment to reflect. The years of searching, the heartbreak, the pain, they had all led to this moment of peace, to this family. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been quick, but it had been worth it. She thought back to those first days, when she had felt so lost, so alone in her quest to find Ava. The endless nights spent wondering if this journey was futile, if Ava would ever know the love and belonging she deserved. There had been so many moments of doubt. But now, as Maggie stood in this kitchen, surrounded by Ava and Lucas, she knew that every single step of the way had been worth it. "Maggie," Ava's voice broke her thoughts. She looked up to find her granddaughter standing in front of her, looking at her with a quiet, soft expression. "Yes, sweetheart." Ava hesitated for a moment, then signed. "I'm glad I found you." Maggie's heart melted. Ava's words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Maggie walked over to her, kneeling down to meet her at eye level. She reached out and took Ava's hands gently in hers. "I'm so glad I found you too, Ava. You're everything I've been waiting for, and I'm never going to leave you." The words felt right. They felt true. Ava smiled, a real smile this time, one that didn't seem to falter or hold back. And in that moment, Maggie knew that this was the family she had always dreamed of, imperfect, yes, but perfectly theirs. The healing had begun, and they were moving forward together. Lucas walked up behind them, wrapping his arms around both of them in a hug that was still tentative, still uncertain, but full of warmth. Ava leaned into him, and Maggie felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This was their family. This was what they had built, through pain, through doubt, through years of uncertainty. The past would always be there, a shadow that couldn't be erased. But Maggie had learned something powerful through it all. Love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about erasing the scars. It was about learning to live with them, to grow because of them, and to build something stronger than before. As Maggie watched her family, she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she was confident in the direction they were heading. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they were home. And as Maggie looked at Ava, she knew one thing for certain. She would fight for this family, for Ava, for Lucas, for the rest of her life. This was only the beginning. And it was beautiful.